Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about now is this idea-expression dichotomy. And this is a very big deal in copyright law. So, copyright doesn't protect ideas. It only protects expressions of ideas. So this goes back in some way to the requirement that it be fixed in tangible form. And so in almost all countries, there's no protection whatsoever for raw ideas. In Ireland, in the Copyright Act in Section 17, it says, copyright protection shall not extend to the ideas and principles which underlie any element of a work, procedures, methods of operation, blah, blah, blah. Okay? So copyright does not protect ideas. It only protects expressions. But this dichotomy is tricky because how close can you go and still be on one side of the line or the other? So as it is, for example, I can write a book about a boy who goes to wizard school. And that's perfectly fine. And there's nothing J.K. Rowling can do about that. No, if I called him Harry, well, it's going to be troublesome, But how close can you go and still be on one side of the line or the other? So why do you think copyright doesn't protect ideas?
It's expand on many more ideas, so you'd be limiting authors.
Yeah, so two people could have the same idea, for example. And who's to say who thought of what first? But also, it's a bit like the requirement to have something fixed in tangible form. How useful is an idea really? How much benefit does it give to the rest of society if you have a great idea and do nothing about it? You're not giving us much. Why should we incentivize that behavior? Whereas if you were coming from the author's rights tradition, you might think, well, an idea is a creation of the mind. We should protect that. And so the bounds between idea and expression aren't always clear. And that's an issue. So this was a very interesting case. Temple Island Collections versus New England Teas. And what made it especially interesting is that it was a case in the UK where we have the labour, skill or judgment test. But it involved a photograph, which the directive said, we saw earlier, the test for originality in a photograph was the author's own intellectual creation. And so this case sat on the boundary of idea and expression, and you'll see why now in a second. So Temple Island Collections was a company that, if you go to London, there's like a souvenir shop and there's kind of biscuit tins with mailboxes and, pictures of Lady Diana and whatnot. They sold that sort of stuff. And they had an image, this one I believe, I might have got them backwards, of London double-decker in red on an otherwise black and white photograph. And New England Teas wanted to produce a tin of tea. And if I'm not mistaken, they even approached Temple Island Collections to license the image and were told no. So they engaged a graphic designer and a photographer, say, look, we want this kind of thing for our box of tea. And so they produced this image, which is of a double-decker London bus in red on an otherwise black and white background of the Houses of Parliament. And Temple Island Collections was cross and went to court saying, hey, you copied our photograph. And New England Teas was, well, no, we didn't copy your photograph. We copied the idea for your photograph. And what was interesting in this case was that, it was common ground that New England Teas had not actually copied any of the photograph. There was no copying and pasting took place of one photograph into another. And New England Teas was able to produce in court, the picture it had taken of the bus or where it got the bus, the picture of the Houses of Parliament. So there was no question of copying per se. But the argument was that this was a copy of this. Now, what do you think? Do you think, who do you think won?
I guess the New English Teas.
And why?
Because they've taken a picture of a bus on a bridge. It's not the same.
It's not the same picture. They didn't copy anything. It's not the same picture. But you could argue they copied the idea.
How many millions of tourists in London every year?
Well, exactly. Even if it was something, shall we say, more original. Now I know the threshold for original, but it's not like a picture of the Houses of Parliament, Palace of Westminster, whatever that's called. There's probably 500 of those taken a day. This could be any one of those, apart from the red bus, which was photoshopped in. So the idea for the picture was the same. But they're two separate expressions of the same idea. Surprisingly, they lost. Temple Island Collections won, which I think is just wrong. I think there's no better example of two different expressions that are completely separate but of the same idea.
What was the rationale behind Temple Island?
It's there on the hard disk. I'd have to open it up and read it out. But he went into it at length. What many people wanted to know was the judge going to apply this new test of author's own intellectual creation? Because you could see how this idea for this picture was the author's own intellectual creation, and that this picture was a copy of that creation. At the same time, a lot of labour, skill and judgment went into the first image, but also New England Teas went to great lengths to make sure that they would be able to demonstrate the labour, skill and judgment that they had gone to. They didn't just turn up with the picture. They had, the guy went out and he took the picture on this day. We hired a photographer to go take our own separate picture of the Palace of Westminster. We did our own labour, skill and judgment to arrive at our picture. And many people on seeing this case thought this is a slam dunk. Idea copied, but expression not. And some people were curious to know, because it was a photograph, because of the directive saying the test was the author's own intellectual creation, which test would be applied, labour, skill or judgment, or author's own intellectual creation. And the judge essentially said they're the same thing, which was kind of surprising as well. Even in the case, they mentioned Schindler's List. Remember in Schindler's List there was this girl in the red coat, and there was talk that, you know, the original picture had been inspired by that. So was this not just copying Steven Spielberg's idea? And actually, if you go further back, in the Battleship Potemkin, which was a black and white movie, and some of the original prints of that, when they hoist the red flag, it was painted in by hand, frame by frame. So when people saw it in the cinema, the flag was red and in colour. You could argue that Steven Spielberg stole or copied the idea from there. So that was a very interesting case. It's hard to know what lessons to draw from it. I mean, I want to say just the judge was wrong.
Why?
Well, it's...
And you're saying that it's a different expression, but it pretty much is the same expression. I mean, when you have Schindler's List photo and the photo of the battleship, it's two different expressions.
So what would they have had to have done if they did this picture in front of Buckingham Palace instead of the Palace of Westminster? Would that have been okay?
It would have been the same. Like the idea that they're trying to emphasize is the standing out of the red bus.
Yeah.
The black background, black and white background.
Yeah. So the judge agreed with you.
The expression is the same.
The judge agreed with you. I think it's a separate expression of the same idea. Implemented independently.
So you're saying
But
that the expression comes from the angles and all of that, or does the expression come from the colour and the way it contrasts?
Well, you see, I can see how this has its own independent labour, skill and judgment. But I can also see how they did copy the author's own intellectual creation. But up to this point, it was very clear the distinction between idea and expression. And you didn't protect ideas, you only protected expressions. So if I was the judge, I would have said, feck off, tough luck. He copied your idea, but he made his own photo. And if you were the judge, you would have agreed with him. But it's an interesting one.
I think the problem is also that no one can really prove that the creator of this picture knew the picture.
Well, no, we know for a fact they knew.
Yeah,
we know for a fact that may have been a factor.
Hypothetically, if there is a different case,
well,
you could argue that sometimes.
Yeah.
Because
it is interesting though that in this case, and it may have been a factor, in this case we know for a fact they knew because they even approached to license this. They asked and were told no. And they said, well, screw you, so we'll make our own. So it was known for a fact that they knew about it. But as such, nothing was copied and pasted in that sense of copying. But the idea was copied. And you could see how if labour, skill and judgment is all you need to make originality, then in Walter V. Lane land, this is clearly a new work. But in author's own intellectual creation land, you could see they have a case. So it was a very interesting one. So the boundary between idea and expression is a bit blurred. And it was interesting that this happened in the UK. No. Here's another one. Designers Guild versus Russell Williams. So this case involved two fabric designs. The one on the left was the original one. And if I'm not mistaken, the person who designed that fabric went off to work for a competitor and came up with the one on the right. And the Designers Guild was claiming that their fabric, which is on the left, was copied by the one on the right. Now, given that I was like throwing this one out of court, Judge Collin was having none of this.
What were their grounds for saying the other one was copied? Because the flower is different.
I mean,
in every way except for the stalk.
it's a flower.
Is the placement of the flower because they line up? Or
I don't think so, because it's just a sample of the fabric, and we probably have to, if we could see, well, we can't go and buy the one on the right because we can't buy it. It's not for sale as a result of this. But it would have been interesting to see the two fabrics laid out on the floor, or hanging on a wall. I don't get it. I don't see how the one on the right is a copy of the one on the left at all. I don't get it. I mean, I could at a stretch see how the idea of the one on the left inspired the one on the right, or copied the one on the right even. But at the same time, having a flower in curtain material, I mean, go figure, that's going to happen, So you could read that in detail, their decision, but again, I was like, I wouldn't have decided that if I was a judge, but then I'm not a judge, nor am I a lord. So that's another interesting one. So here they were saying that that's a copy. I think we could maybe at a stretch accept that the idea was copied. But even so, we don't protect ideas in copyright. We only protect expressions of ideas. It is interesting that they're both visual things. Were they both books? I think it would be clear what was the idea and what was the expression. And maybe it's because they're visual, the boundary is harder to establish. I don't know. But again, I think that's just a wrong decision. But it is the decision, and it is the law as it stands in the UK anyway since 2001. I'd love to see more of the fabric. That's the best I could do in terms of finding the designs. So, yes, you can say to people, ideas are not protected, only expressions are. But when it comes down to the detail, then you might well be worth your while going to court and arguing your case. It seems actually this is a huge business, and there's an awful lot of money in curtain fabric. I would have thought, leave them at it. I don't get how allowing the one on the right to be on sale was an issue for the people producing the one on the left. Now, another interesting one then that was not foreseen when the Statute of Anne was written in 1710 was TV formats. That's another one that sort of breaks our understanding. It's another interesting test of whether the law is working as we would like. So, if you copy an episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and go selling that, you're clearly breaching the copyright of the people who made the show. if you go away and make your own show using the format of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, now, aside from the fact that maybe they've trademarked Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, perhaps as a trademark, but aside from that, like, what are you copying? So, like, RTE would have paid the TV company in the UK to do the Eamon Dunphy version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire for Ireland. But it is interesting, why was to stop them just going away making their own show anyway, with the same format?
Like Wants to Be a Millionaire, you could have, would you have copyright in the actual visuals, the graphics on screen?
The graphics on screen, there would have been copyright in those. And there may have been a trademark in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. They may even have gone to the trouble of trademarking Phone a Friend and a 50-50 and all these things, right? But who's to say we couldn't have gone away and said, Who Wants to Be Rich? And had our own different graphics in green with shamrocks instead of, you know, the blue graphics and black graphics they had on that. I mean, the idea with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is that the money gets doubled, isn't it, every time? And if you get any question wrong, you lose everything. And you can ask the audience, phone a friend, and do a 50-50. The question is, in that format, is that protectable? It's clear how the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire show, when it was made, was an expression of that idea, and it used that format. But was the format itself protectable?
When I think about it, it's probably not. When you think of all the shows on BBC and ITV, those kind of panel shows with all the comedians, like 8 out of 10 cats in the row, doing whatever they do. I mean, there's so many variations of that on so many channels.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting one. You know, did you ever see the lyrics board? Yeah, not my cup of tea at all. That's a huge success as a format. That has been sold to lots of different countries. It's a huge success. I mean, I don't see the appeal myself at all. But so there is a thing there that can be sold and exploited. And it is fair to say, I mean, the person who came up with the idea for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was pretty good at his or her job. You know, I mean, that was a clever format because it was so simple and the stakes got higher and higher and higher, and there was so much at stake eventually. I mean, we were all glued to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. People are glued to the Great British Bake Off as well, and I don't get that either. In fairness, I haven't seen a full episode of it, and I certainly haven't seen a whole season of it where you get invested in the characters in air quotes. But I mean, that went from the BBC to Channel 4 or something for millions and millions of pounds. Channel 4 paid to have that change channels. Now, it wasn't obviously it costs money to make that, but that millions and millions and millions doesn't represent the cost of making it. It represents the, I suppose, brand in terms of Great British Bake Off, which is one thing, but also the format. And could Channel 4 have decided to make, English baker show? I mean, is there much in Great British format, Great British Bake Off as a format even? I don't think there is. So I mean, they bake stuff, don't they?
Presenters, the personalities.
Right. Yeah.
That's where Channel 4 slipped up. They didn't get the personalities to come across.
Right.
So
right.
The show, but not
Right. Because as a format, I think there probably isn't even much in it, in the sense that in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, there is quite a structured format there. You know. Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So some people have gone to court to try and stop their shows being copied, and it does raise the question, well, what have we copied? You had an idea for a show, we made our own show with okay the same idea. But again, the idea expression thing causes a problem here, because it is arguable that we should want to protect TV formats. If you come up with a great idea for a TV show, you should be able to not have someone just rip you off. But, you know, it poses a problem. Right, so we've looked then at the things you need to do to get copyright. We've looked at the kinds of things that can be copyrighted. We have looked at the requirements then you have to meet in order for there to be copyright in something that fits one of those categories. So it has to be tangible, it has to be original, and in theory at least, it must be more than just an idea. It must be an expression of an idea. So once you have met those criteria and your work is protected by copyright, what rights do you have then as an author? And that's the next question we're going to try and answer. So this is from the Irish Act. This is section 37. And it gives you an exclusive right to undertake or to authorize others to undertake the following things. So you can control who copies the work. You control who makes the work available to the public. And you can control who can make an adaptation. And if somebody who does some of that without your permission, that person then is infringing your copyright. And that applies whether they do it to the whole work or to any substantial part of the work. Now, what's substantial? That's a whole other thing. I mean, if you take a tiny sample of someone's music, is that a substantial piece or not? That could be a whole other question. So this is a good example, perhaps, of how laws work. So the Oireachtas, in this case, Parliament in Ireland, would have said any substantial part. That's as much as they were prepared to say. It's up then to someone to go to court and figure out what substantial would mean, for example. Okay? So if you're the author, you can say who can copy it, who can make it available to the public, and who can make adaptations. Now, there is this idea of moral rights, and I mentioned those earlier, I think. And these come from the droit d'auteur tradition, or author's rights tradition in Europe. And these are to do with your rights as an author, separate from the economics of it. So separate from the fact that you're producing this work and you should get some money back, perhaps, to pay off your investment in time and effort, your labour, skill and judgment, whatever. You also have certain moral rights over your work. And these are not really economic rights as such. So the first right is the paternity right. And that's the right to be acknowledged as the author of a work. So J.K. Rowling sold the rights to print copies of her novels to whichever publishing house she sold them to. Aside from all that, she had the moral right to be recognized as the author of that work. And that's separate from her financial reward. And we see that that here then is in the Irish law. So an author has the right to be identified as the author, except where the author uses a pseudonym. That shall be used. But there are exceptions. So reporting of current events. So if you're a journalist and you write a piece for a newspaper, the newspaper isn't required to identify as the author of that. And if you contribute to an encyclopedia or a dictionary. Imagine if every entry in the dictionary had to have the the author's name. I mean, that would be ridiculous. So there are some exemptions there. Okay. Another moral right an author has is an integrity right. And that's the right of an author to have his work remain intact and unadulterated. So if, for example, I took a photograph and it was a creative work of art, and I licensed someone to use that photograph and they were giving me money, that's fair enough. The paternity right would give me the right to be identified as the photographer. But the integrity right would give me the right to stop them bastardizing it, basically. So imagine I gave it to them in a particular format and it was being used on some crappy website where they, squeezed it in, changed the aspect ratio, cropped off the top and the bottom, and who knows, God forbid, photoshopped in a red bus on top of it or something. I have the right to ensure that the work remains intact and unadulterated. Some people talk about how, a great movie sometimes has ads just put in at some random point that just some computer somewhere decides in the middle of, the love scene in Romeo and Juliet or something that, it's time for an ad, buy the cereal, and then comes back. Some people would argue that in treating an artistic work like that with such disrespect, that you are infringing on the integrity right of the author. So that's a right separate from economic right. Okay? And in Ireland, this is in section 109. And the author shall have the right to object to any distortion, mutilation, or other modification of or other derogatory action in relation to the work, which would prejudice his or her reputation. So if J.K. Rowling sold the book to the publishing house and they gave her lots of money and they said, we're just going to cut out a lot of that sort of magic stuff. It was a bit boring. And we're going to put in some sex scenes between Harry and, what was her name? You don't know? Anyway, you're one. J.K. Rowling might be upset, and they could come back and say, well, look, we're giving you your money. I mean, we're giving you the money we said we'd give you. What's your problem? But she has this integrity right. She has the right for her work to not be distorted or mutilated. And also those sex scenes might harm her reputation as the author. So that's a right she has, an integrity right. Okay? So in the next class, we're going to look at who is the author of a work. Obviously, for a novel, it's the person who wrote the novel. But for other more interesting creative works, not more interesting, but other different kinds of creative works, that gets more complex. So we'll look at that the next day. Thanks, guys.